if you can. Okay, so next up is a man who's probably already been introduced, but I would like to share with you his superpower. Carl made a commitment many years ago to make sure that every interaction he had with anybody turned out positive for the person, even if the news was bad. Now, that's a pretty high standard, and I commend Carl for pursuing that. You did this, Carl. Yeah, and it was a real inspiration for me. And the secret to this, by the way, is if you don't have any stuff about it yourself, it's much easier. So the key is to not have stuff yourself. But he's been a great inspiration to me. He is the initial leader that got the Decision Society off the map, and has a wonderful case study to show us. Again, one of these foundational ones on Amoco. So, Carl, take it away.
Thank you. This is the Unleaded Amoco decision. Let me set the stage. Standard of Indiana, which later became Amoco and now is part of BP, was one of the big oil companies back in the 60s and 70s. And they were headquartered in Chicago. They were probably among the most advanced in terms of doing good financial analysis. They were already doing discounted cash flow methods to the best that I've seen. They were being, and my professor, where I was a graduate student, had a good relationship with them and taught them a lot of this engineering economics, as we called it at that time. And so they became my guinea pig for my dissertation and agreed to do something on corporate risk policy. And I did the first corporate utility function as my dissertation. But as part of that, they got intrigued about decision analysis, and they wanted at the top executive level to continue at the forefront. And so I had given them like a day's worth of training of what we knew at that time of decision analysis. And that all had happened. And I get a call while I'm doing some of my work there from the president of this part of the organization. And he says, Carl, how long would a decision analysis take on the Unleaded Amoco decision? Well, I had learned a little about the Unleaded Amoco decision. And there was a guy that had started an oil company that made white gas that was called the American Oil Company. That's where Amoco, the name, came from. And Standard of Indiana had bought him. This guy is now on the board. And the special thing about this Amoco, American Oil Company, was that they made white gas, which was unleaded, but high enough octane you could use it in the cars at that time. Okay? You couldn't get to the high octane without lead additives in that period. And this guy was a champion. Now he's on the board of directors because he's the biggest shareholder at 3 or 4% shares of this oil company. But he has a voice. And he wanted them to go to unleaded gasoline nationwide. And he'd wanted that now for 3 years. And they had kept studying this problem over and over again. They were on the 5th time because each time they studied it, they got to the board, they'd say, it's too expensive, it's too risky, it's going to cost us $600 million to do this, and therefore we shouldn't do it. And then he'd find a hole in their presentation. And at this point, the president, something like 10 months before he called me, had started a task force, gave him everything they wanted. He was new in his job, and he says, I'm going to kill this question once and for all. I'm not going to have our best analytical team constantly tied up in this question, so I'm going to solve it once and for all. He gave him a huge budget, put the best people on, And that group had been working on this for 10 months already. Okay? And he had had this seminar on decision analysis, and now he said, hey, what would it take to do a decision analysis on this? And I said, well, depends on all those people that have been working on it. Would they be collaborators or is it in competition? He says, oh, no, they're the best we have. They would be what? They'll completely collaborate. They're interested in any new methodology. Right? And it actually turned out that way. That team was terrific. Okay? But it was one of the very few cases where I had the chance to do a decision analysis in parallel with at that point, traditional analysis. And they were analyzing 13 different scenarios in great depth with cash flow modeling and optimizing the refineries across the country with linear programs to run them. These linear programs required them to hook all their computers together to be able to get it done. Okay, this is 1967. So I'm in here starting a decision analysis. And I get into the most controversial questions, and they were, when, if ever, will government ban leaded gasoline? Okay? It wasn't banned. And here we're going out there and doing something very expensive, okay? If we do switch to unleaded now, what will the competitors do? And how will our customers react? And will that hasten the government action? Okay? And is the general public really prepared to pay extra for environmentally safer products when we're not forced to do them, but when it's voluntary? Notice how almost current this is with all the issues in different settings. That's why I still love this thing. And how much more expensive will manufacturing of the unleaded gasoline really be? And finally, in the case of a ban of leaded gasoline, will the competitors be able to come up with their own technology, or will they have to license ours? That would be the ideal. Okay, the ideal would be government. We are so successful, people want it, people buy it. Because of that, the government follows suit and bans unleaded gasoline. Everybody has to follow, and they all have to license our technology. And it's a platform catalyst-based technology, and we've already got most of the catalyst, and then the catalyst costs skyrocket, and they have to pay us royalties. Boy, have we got a nice comparative advantage, okay? Now, the downside is customers don't pay extra. The government gets the message. Nobody's pushing this very fast. It costs us 2 cents more a gallon. In those days, gasoline was 22 cents. Okay, so it costs us 2 cents more to make it, and we can only charge a penny more. We're losing margin on every gallon that we're selling, and we're bleeding to death relative to our competitors. You can see why there's a lot of risk, okay? And so that was the problem. And we created an influence diagram. Not as pretty as we would do today, not as efficiently as we would today. And today, we can make influence diagrams compute if we actually do them as analytical methods. So we didn't have that then, but the idea of understanding how these different things work together to generate the overall result. We built that in a model. It was a timeshare model. I had a lot of punch paper tape and in my little cubicle, and it worked just fine. Okay? The results came out pretty quickly, and I had interviewed a lot of people, and we got, at the very top was what happened in customer response and what kind of market share would we get. Okay? Next highest was what government would do. And then came the manufacturing costs and other things going down. Okay? What do you think their 13 scenarios were done on. Almost everything was around manufacturing cost. Manufacturing cost was not the big swing factor. And these guys were superb engineers, and they knew how to deal with that problem. They had fallen into what I later called one of the big mega biases, which is the comfort zone bias. People do what they know how to do, not what is important for the decision. Okay? For that reason, it's very important to go have decision-making as a cycle. If you have a decision to make, by about a third of the way in, you got to be able to understand what the gaps are and put your energy on what needs to be improved to reach decision quality, as opposed to doing what comes naturally. Because what we do naturally is taking the problem into our space, okay? So we got these results, and with those results, we had to go spend more time on really understanding market share. Nobody knew anything. We interviewed all these different experts and had lots of different curves. And we had, like these two experts, he was more optimistic and said the market share couldn't be below 37%. And the other one barely said, no way. In fact, that's only a 17% chance that we would be as high as him, okay? So people were all over the map. And we interviewed and we put it together. And in one of those sessions, the president actually sat in. He had, by that time, heard that market share was the biggest swing factor. And he says, I want to understand what these guys say and what they know. And he sat in on the session, and we had all these differences. And at the end of the session, he went up there with the pen. We had a lot of flimsies in those days, transparency. And with the pen, he drew the curve. So having listened to you all, this is the curve I want you to use. And there was almost like a rebellion in the room. It says, what makes you so smart? Shouldn't we at least average or something? And somebody asked him, what makes you think we should use your curve? And he pointed to the guy. He says, just think, I'm going to make a recommendation to the board of directors, and 2 years later, we have a bad outcome. And I'm in front of the board, and I tell them, well, I never believed the inputs anyway. What do you think they'd do with me? Okay? That settled the question. If he was going to be the primary decision maker recommending to the board, it had to be the stuff he believed. It wasn't about averaging everybody else, but in his decision, he had to have it. And that is a powerful lesson to me that has stuck with me for many years. Well, behind this was a tree, and I actually fully expanded that tree, had it on my wall, okay? And people would come in and argue and says, well, over here, you're not right. If we get into that situation, there's really something else that could be done, and so on. So it had become a structure in the room. But there were 360 scenarios, and we put probabilities on them through assessment and so on. And then we ran the tree through the computer, and we multiplied the probabilities out and calculated the net present value. Then you resort that, and you turn it into a cumulative probability distribution. Okay? We all know how to do that. That's not complicated. And this was the overall probability distribution. Well, what do you see? We could lose 600 million. We could get up to 800 million. You want to bet your company on this? Probably not, right? So there was and we explained it, okay, 10 percentiles and what it all was. And I want to bring you back to the story now. The traditional task force had collaborated with me a lot, and they were getting ready to make their final presentation. Okay? And I was lagging by 2 weeks before and they had a long presentation, and it was, this thick. And the end recommendation was, don't do it. And in fact, there's some positive, there's some negative, but it's too big of a risk. And explained with tremendous detail and stuff, and made no sense to me, okay? And so, when on ours, the expected value was slightly negative. And, one more thing. The task force had finished its presentation. It was very thick and very heavy. And the president said, just what I asked for. Just what I wanted. Do this, do that, package it up. I'm going to take it to the next board meeting. We're going to get it done. So when I heard that, I was a little disappointed. So 2 weeks later, the board meeting hasn't happened yet, okay? I'm presenting, and I get to this chart. And the president says, I want that chart in the board package. And I said, why do you want this chart in the board package? It says, that says it perfectly. We could lose a hell of a lot of money. We could make a hell of a lot of money, and we don't know what the hell will happen. And this says it scientifically. Okay? And so I said, yeah, but wait a second, let me finish. And, these little dots down below were their scenarios. Okay? All the scenarios were clustered. In fact, if you had believed the economic analysis, you would have probably said more likely that it'll be up, okay, than down. But in the end, they said, but don't do it anyway. And I said, okay, now, before we go on, what about the market share? That is so important. And remember, I had 4 branches in the tree there. We started out with 5, when we dropped 1. So I said, what does it look like with each branch? Well, in the case, if we knew that we were on high market share, if we had that good response from customers, you definitely want to go forward with this, okay? This is looking pretty good. And so I decided to go and add a slide for them. There's a $360 million expected value. And as a surprise, against the marketing guys did not want me to even bring this forward. But I was a young, gutsy guy, and I said, all right, I'm going to just show them this because I had learned about value of information. Okay? I said, so you're not going to go forward with this and commit fully, but you could conduct a nationwide market test. And if you do that nationwide market test, there's only a 20% chance that the market share will be very large. But if it is, you get on the average $360 million. And if not, you discontinue it. And it will cost you somewhere, and I had gotten a couple of lower-level people in the marketing side give me reluctantly what it would take. He said, would it be even hard to stockpile the materials? It would be this. And if we pulled out of a market test, we would have so many enemies after we showed we could do it. We would be the pariahs in the environmental community. We do not want to do a market test, no matter what. Okay? And so, but I said, yeah, but how much would it cost? How much would this be? And it came down to 10 to 20 million, and you could get back out of it. Okay? And at this point in this presentation to the CEO, along with his direct reports, the chief marketing officer says, no way, we would never do that. We never take less than a 50-50 chance in marketing. And the president looks at him and says, when you can win $360 million and lose 20? We do that in in our oil drilling all the time. What are you talking about? As a company, of course, we got to think about this. So the meeting ended without a conclusion, and I didn't know what was going to happen. And about a month later, the president calls me, and I'm still this young graduate student type, okay? So I'm getting a call from the president, I'm impressed. And he says, Carl, I just want to let you know, the only thing I took to the board was the decision analysis. And I said, why is that? He says, well, it was so much easier to understand. Now, previously, when the big report had come from the primary team, he said, package it up, we'll take it to the board. And one of the people that had been on that team said, you know, you should wait and see what the decision analysis, we think it's going to give us some interesting additional insight. Okay, they were really on board with that. And he says, well, no, I don't think, that's really for us. The board wouldn't understand that anyway. Okay? His view was it would be much too complex to take it to the board. And when I asked him, well, why did you take it to the board? He said, because it was so much easier to understand. The fundamental thing about this is that if at the core of this decision is uncertainty, and they were trying to address a decision that required understanding uncertainty with deterministic scenarios. And you couldn't get there. Okay? So this decision analysis was a much improved thing, both for the decision maker, and now people said, well, if it's so much better, how much more would it have cost? And I got the team together with me and said, if we had just done the decision analysis, what would have happened? They said it would have taken us 1/3 of the time to do it. It would have cost us 1/10 the amount. And I said, why? We didn't need all that cost information. Of that big budget we had, 90% of it went to understanding and predicting cost consequences of the decision. Okay? And then in this final report to the board, it was the only thing that really mattered. So that's the story. It changed my life. I went home after this happened to my wife, and I said, and I was still a graduate student, but we already had 2 little kids. And I said to her, I know what I want to do professionally. I want to help executives make decisions. And she looked at me with wide eyes, and she said, aren't they the ones that know how? And she was very afraid, here I'm going to choose a career of bringing ice to Eskimos or something, and so on. It's been a very rewarding career. So with that, let me open it up to questions. I think we have 5 minutes for questions. Pardon? Oh, they did. The response was kind of in the middle. The government started following, and they did it was a big boom to them, ultimately, because they were the first with unleaded before they were forced to. Yeah. That's interesting. I think, like everybody knows. It was their big card for a long time. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I think luck. Luck is just another name for an outcome, for a good outcome, and it has a probability. And the people that prepare well are usually, on the average, more lucky. Okay. Yeah. Oh, for me to be able to have done this in my 20s was complete luck. Was complete. I mean, that was not because of my now, the fact that I was able then to do it reasonably well, and I had some competence to add to it, but mostly it's luck. I had a right professor that I had a relationship with Standard. I happened to be able to be in the right place. I got a president that was open to these things. I mean, this was, I do not want to say that I have credit for this. Let me say, I have a brother that is one of the foremost neurosurgeons, okay? So he and I are together with our spouses. And I asked him, so Robert, with all your accomplishments, what percent do you ascribe to luck? Okay, let's just both think about it. And our spouses were there, and I said, you guys think about that too. What percent of it was lucky? Both he and I came up with 90% plus, that our life, relatively successful, living the American dream, coming from Germany as teenagers, okay, was that much luck. And our spouses both came up with like 60% accomplishment and only 40% luck. But when you count in what family you're born in, what genes you're born in, how you happen to be at what time and where, most of our life is not what we did for it. It was what we were, the cards we were dealt, I think.
So knowing that,
Yeah.
part of the question is, what you learned, and
Yeah.
how, so, how did you take that into
Oh, this decision I did, and I was committed to join Ron Howard and Jim Matheson and that group they were doing out at Stanford, and I was going to go. My wife and I were going to go out there for 2 years and then go back to Chicago and get rich. But I got stuck, okay? We're still out there, same colleagues, same people. It was wonderful. Yeah, yeah, good.
All right, let's hear it
Thank
for
you.
Carl.